Welcome to the Redcaps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and ramble on about old school games. Today's episode, we are joined by a fantastic artist and a blogger named Niklas from Paths Peculiar. As you know, no mortal can outrun a Redcap, so sit back, listen, and I hope you enjoy. Niklas, thanks very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
You get to be the first guinea pig of people that I try to interview on here.
Oh, cool.
And I found you ages ago. You had done a illustration showing all the different weapons from D&D. And yes. I thought that was just an amazing little piece of art. I actually used it in one game and held it up and told people this is what you can choose from.
Great.
And it was
like a menu.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the shopkeep had a little display unit up of everything they offered. And what caused me to reach out to you, I was reading through on Facebook and came across a link you had put up to a post you had made about why the bag of holding is bad for D&D. And I read through it and I found myself nodding along with almost everything you were saying as we were going through it. And then I went back and looked at the comments on said Facebook post, and I think I had found a whole different group of people that just couldn't wrap their head around it for some reason and seemed very upset over your concept on it. Before we get to their response, though, do you want to give a brief explanation of why you think the bag of holding is bad for D&D?
Yeah, and yeah, people got really mad about it, or some people did. The vocal people got really mad. I actually got quite a lot of people who, just like you, agreed with me. So, but I mean, I think my thinking behind that article, because I have been pondering the bag of holding for quite a long time. I mean, I played D&D for 20 years or so, and before that I played other games, and the bag of holding has always been around, I think, and it's kind of the staple magic item in many campaigns. It's one of the first items many groups kind of try to get or try to buy because it makes life a lot easier for them. And I mean, I've always taken it for granted that this is something you should have in D&D. But then I got thinking, and when I started to kind of dissect D&D, and especially old school D&D, so like BX and the early versions, it's D&D at its core, at least to me, is an expedition style type of adventuring game, where you gather up your followers or your comrades, and you go out on an expedition into the wilderness or into the Underdark or into the deserted castle, whatever it might be. And to me, I'm a guy who likes to go on expeditions myself. I was in the military for many years, and I still enjoy hiking and going out in nature and everything. And a big part of expeditions is preparing for expeditions. So, and that's basically making choices. D&D is a game of making choices, and the choices start even before you go to the dungeon or before you go to the dark forest. You have to sit down and first of all try to figure out where are we going and what can we possibly encounter there. So we need to prepare in different ways, and this can be everything from deciding what spells should a magic user memorize before heading out. But also I think that equipment is a big thing. So when you go on an expedition, you have to make decisions. How much food do we need to bring? How much torches do we need to bring in order to be able to go through a dark dungeon? Do we need rope? Do we need climbing equipment? Whatever it might be. And the problem I've come to realize that the bag of holding brings to the game is that it takes away the need for prioritizing. Basically, if you have a bag of holding, you can bring as many torches as you want. You can bring as much rope, climbing equipment, water, food, everything. So you never really have to do a choice. You can buy everything you want from the store and just mash it into the bag of holding. Some people will probably protest against this and say it only has a 1,000-pound limit. Yeah, sure, but still, basically what it does, it takes away the need for prioritization. It takes away choice from the characters or from the players. So if you can bring anything you might possibly need, then what's the fun in planning an expedition? That's my main gripe, I would say, with the bag of holding. I didn't realize that I actually thought this until very recently, and that's why I wrote the blog post. So
Yeah, I agree. For me, the biggest thing that I kind of took away from the bag of holding, as far as why I don't typically hand it out, is less about, for me, it's less about the choice of what they make at the start of the expedition, and I'll talk about why that's a little bit less for me, given a house rule that I like to use. But for me, it was the bag of holding completely negates having to make choices in the dungeon regarding what items I'm going to haul back out. It really seems like the bag of holding was invented to avoid encumbrance problems, and I think that while tracking encumbrance, the way it's typically done, rules as written, can be a little bit tedious, can be a little bit boring, especially if you've got a group of people who are new to it, they're trying to balance out this sort of thing. But I think that the boring resource tracking really adds to tension in the game, and if you take that completely away, you've removed a core part of the decision making process. You mentioned in the town, but like I said, I think it's a core decision making process that happens in the dungeon itself.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, again, if we take torches for an example, I can understand why someone, or why you would find counting torches a bit tedious and boring. But if you phrase it differently, so if you have 10 torches, that means we have a finite amount of light. After a while, the lights will go out and then we're toast. That's a much more exciting and interesting dilemma, I think, to consider when you go into a dungeon. Do we press on for a bit more and risk running out of torches? Because we know if we run out of torches, then we're toast. So yes, if you only see resource management as a type of administration, then yes, it's boring. But if you weave it into the narrative and into the challenge of the game, then I think it can be a lot of fun. Counting rations might not be the most interesting thing. And I agree with you to some extent that the rules as written for encumbrance might not be that sexy. And I don't think that you necessarily have to play by those rules, but I think that you should have encumbrance as a thing in your game. Whether it should be super detailed or a more abstract approach that's up to your own style. But again, the bag of holding removes basically encumbrance from the game, and I think that's a mistake. I think you're losing out parts of what makes D&D D&D.
Yeah, I agree completely. The way I house rule it, I'll spin out my house rule for encumbrance and see if this would be something that makes your hair stand up, or if you're like, oh, that makes sense. So for me, I changed two things. One, I go to a slot-based inventory tracking method. So I take strength. Everybody gets 10 slots, and then you apply your strength modifier to it. So if you've got a -1, you've got 9 slots. If you got a +2, you got 12 slots. And in those slots, they're divided up into halves. So you can have, if you have torches, for instance, and you can hold multiple torches in your hand, those would fit into a half slot. And then the other thing I have with regards to inventory and encumbrance is, rather than make my players spend a ton of time in town at the shop, going dramatically over your beautiful illustration of what they should bring, or some of the other books that we have for things that they can buy, I let them buy what I call supply. I believe I stole this from 5 Torches Deep, a different 5e modification game, but the idea of supply is they buy it. It fills up slots, but it's something that they can convert. They can use a turn to convert that supply to whatever they need when they're in the dungeon. So I've got this mythical thing called supply, and if I decide I need ball bearings, I can convert one of my supply to ball bearings. And same thing with torches or food or what have you. So they still have to acquire those things, but they can acquire them while they're in the dungeon, with the idea that supply indicates that they are intelligent, folks that probably did all that planning back in
Yeah.
town, and they're just activating it now while they're in the dungeon. And that's how, that seems to have worked pretty well. It allows them to still come up with creative solutions. Like
Yeah.
nothing is worse than whenever you see a player go, "Oh man, if I only had this, I could have done something really cool." Well, I want them to do the
Yeah.
thing that's really cool, so it gives them a chance to do it. But there's still some constraints on them where there is a finite supply that they have.
Yeah. No, I think it's perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And I don't think that abstraction, because I mean that's an example of abstracting and removing some detail. I think it makes perfect sense. It's still about resource management. Some people will prefer the more detailed approach. For example, I can see the charm in some types of I don't know, equipment that should probably not go into the supplies category. So, for example, did we bring holy water because we're facing a lot of undeads? I think those kind of detailed tools that you would perhaps not always have in your supplies makes sense not to have abstracted, because this also ties into, I mean, a lot of D&D adventures, you have a part of the adventure where you actually are looking for information about the place you're going to. You're rolling on rumors tables and stuff like that. I think that's part of the game as well. So if the players are doing proper research, they should probably have a better chance at the dungeon, because they will equip accordingly to that research. So while I think abstraction absolutely works, and I love the slot system as well. I think that Lamentations to the Flame Princess is a BX clone that uses that one. I think that that's a really nice approach. Probably something I would absolutely be happy to use when I play. But again, some specialized equipment should be removed from the abstract rules about supplies, I think.
Yeah, when we do it, the way I run it, it's you can't have any magical potions or
Mm,
holy water would fall into that. Weapons can't be used for supply. It's basically all
yeah,
the mundane items, your rope, your torches, spikes, that sort of thing,
yeah,
is what they can convert the supply into, for exactly that same reason. If you got a rumor that there's undead, you may want to go get your own holy water for that.
yeah,
I completely agree with you there.
yeah.
Um, why do you think when you put this up, like you said, there was a lot of folks like myself that were nodding along, but there's a lot of people that they almost seem to have a gut reaction against it. Do you think it's more that they were consciously thinking of, oh, I like my bag of holding, it's amazing, or what do you think actually brought that on? Is there a whole group of people that just want to have the narrative side and only the narrative side of D&D?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are as many styles of D&D as its players, and to be perfectly honest, I mean, how I wrote the blog post is slightly provocative, I guess. People were accusing me of a clickbait article, a clickbait heading, and I mean, they're not wrong. But what I think they do is they read it, and basically what they read is me telling them that they're playing the wrong way, and no one wants to hear that. And I mean, yeah, perhaps I'm saying they're playing it the wrong way. I'm not really that invested. It's not like I'm annoyed about how anyone else plays the game. What I'm doing is telling people this is how I enjoy to play the game. Uh, some people will interpret that I'm attacking their play style, uh, which I mean, you know how the internet is. People get angry for small stuff. I mean, we're still talking about the nerd game for nerds. I mean, it's not a big thing that people tell each other how they want to play the game, but it's going to annoy people, and I didn't take that too seriously, to be honest. I think it's a bit of banter, absolutely, but it's all in good fun, I think. So, but yeah, some people got angry, and you bring up something about the story, and I've read a lot of good blog posts and Twitter threads lately regarding story in D&D, and it feels like there's a division between 5e players and old school players, that a lot of the people who enjoyed the newer editions of the game, they're very focused on the story and they want to tell a story, while perhaps old school gamers, or people who prefer the older versions, they tend to think more about the game as a game that has a narrative. But a narrative isn't necessarily a story. A story certainly consists of a narrative, but the way I think myself and many other old school gamers are more interested in the narrative within the kind of framework of the game. So the story in itself isn't that important. I think a lot of us are happy to just drop the characters in the world and see what they do. We will provide them with narratives, we'll provide them with some background and things to explore, but not necessarily an overarching story. And I don't think we put as much emphasis on the characters. When I read a lot of like 5e threads or posts on Facebook, a lot of people seem to invest really heavily in their characters. I think this is less important to me and other players like me. The characters are, of course, I mean, they're interesting. That's why we play role-playing games. But I don't spend 2 days thinking about a new character. I mean, I create the character and then we'll see what happens. And I kind of make it up as we go. So that character evolves through gaming with it, not by thinking too much about it beforehand.
Yeah, I think there was a big shift with 5e, partly because of how the way it became popular was in part due to more live recordings and streaming of games, and it became a performative game, less so than what it was before. So you see a lot more people seeing the performance, and they see the deep stories that are getting told, and that's what they get drawn to. And it's almost like a TV show. Nobody wants to see the main characters of their favorite TV show die, and I think that's where people approach 5e now, which is perfectly fine. If that's the fun they want to have. I think that there's probably games that are better suited to having long form stories like that than D&D is, but obviously it's working in 5e. It's more popular than ever. But like you, I prefer more where the game is more about the world that the characters are in and how they overcome challenges, and then we find out stuff about those characters as they go through said challenges. Is kind of how I prefer it. But when I was looking through your blog and what have you, I had something popped up that I had a question about. Can you tell me, and I'm going to terribly butcher this pronunciation, Drakar Osh Demor, the Swedish RPG that you had mentioned on your Can you tell me a little bit about that? I've never heard anything about it at all.
Yeah, certainly, and I understand it. It's hard to pronounce it. It's called Drakar och Demoner. It's translated to English. It would be Dragons and Demons. And this was the big fantasy role-playing game in Sweden while I was growing up, and it was probably the reason why Dungeons and Dragons never really was big when I was a teenager. So this game came in 1982, I think, in Sweden. So they were kind of pioneers, the guys who started up. Obviously, they were influenced by Dungeons and Dragons, but the game is actually quite different. It has a completely different rule set. It's based on the basic role-playing rules from I don't know, was it RuneQuest who started with that one?
It's like the percentile
I don't know exactly, but yeah, so it was BRP based, and before D&D managed to get a foothold in Sweden, these guys released the game, and it became immensely popular. So it was the big game in Sweden all through the 80s when the hobby started to become popular. So basically, when I was a young kid and early teenager, this was the game everyone was playing. This one or a science fiction variant of it. But other than that, other than the rules, I mean, it's pretty basic standard fantasy D&D sword and sorcery kind of thing. So it's not in any way very different than other fantasy games. It just was the big game when my generation was growing up. Then it developed in the late 90s into a more Gonzo-style game called Chronopia. It was about a big fantasy city with elves riding ostriches and really, really strange stuff. It was really creative, actually, really cool. And then in the early 2000s, the brand was picked up by a company called Riot Minds in Sweden, and they went back to the roots and they added a lot of like Norse mythology to it. So nowadays it's more of a northern fantasy thing. It's not as popular anymore, I think, but still it's one of the big pillars of the tabletop hobby in Sweden, and a lot of us grew up with it. So yeah.
Well, that's very cool. I'll see if I can. Do you know if they ever made a English translation of it?
Yeah, the latest editions have English versions of it, so it should be available also in English, I think.
All right, excellent. I'll take a look, and if I find any links, I'll put them in the show notes so other folks
Yeah,
can find it too. I'm always interested to see how the game, well, the whole hobby as a whole, kind of changed a little bit depending on what region you were in and where you first discovered it. So I'm curious to see some more of that game.
yeah.
Before we wrap up, where can people find you? And is there any projects that you're working on right now? Is there any big art projects you're working? Because I love the line art that you do. It's fantastic, the maps and the various illustrations. But is there a spot where people can find a lot of that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I have my Instagram account is probably the most active channel, but also Twitter. I guess you can put links in the descriptions, but it's Paths Peculiar on both Twitter and Instagram. Then I have my website. Can put the URL in the description as well, where there's a lot of free stuff for personal use, so people can download maps and dungeon maps, world maps, weapon illustrations, or what have you. Right now, I'm working on a really big project. It's for Severed Books, or in the US. It's a Philly-based game studio. They're releasing an adventure, a 5e adventure that is based on the Philly punk rock band The Dead Milkmen.
yeah.
So it's a really, really cool project. And I'm doing the maps for that one. And I have been working a lot on it. So there's going to be a lot of maps, a lot of big maps in that one, and some extra stuff for Kickstarter backers. It's on pre-order now, I think, as well. So people who missed the Kickstarter can probably check that out. And that's going to take me, well, at least until mid-January or something. I have a small break planned in November, where I'm going to do a little bit of my own stuff on the side. Because when you're working on big commissions, sometimes you need to take a break from it and just do some personal stuff as well. So, but yeah, that's the big project for me right now.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks very much. And folks, this is going to wrap up this episode of the Redcaps Podcast. I hope you enjoyed, listened, and learned something. And like I said, I will put a lot of links down in the description. There's a bunch of things that you can find out, both about Niklas and his amazing work, and hopefully about some other games that we can chat about in the future. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to head over to anchor.fm/theredcaps, you can leave me a voicemail or say hi on Twitter or Facebook at theredcapsnet. If you have Discord, there's a link going to be in the description that you can join our Discord server and we can meet up for some games at some point. Until then, remember, never let your cap dry out. Stay safe. Have fun. We'll talk again soon. Take care.